Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're going to get into something pretty heavy, a new video that Hamas released just this past Saturday.
That's right, May 10th. It shows 2 Israeli hostages still alive in Gaza. It's drawn a lot of focus, understandably.
Absolutely. We're talking about Yossef-Haïm Ohana, who's 24, and Elkanah Babat, 36.
And both of them, it's important to remember, were taken from the Nova Music Festival. That was during the attacks on October 7th, 2023.
A day that's just seared into memory. So seeing them now, after all this time, it really brings the human cost front and center again.
Exactly. And this deep dive, our goal is really to, unpack the context around this video, what it might mean in the wider conflict.
Yeah, and to acknowledge the sheer emotional weight of something like this. The reactions have been all over the place.
Okay, so the video itself, it's about 3 minutes long.
And what does it actually show?
Well, you see Yossef-Haïm Ohana. He's speaking in Hebrew.
Okay.
And then there's Elkanah Babat, but he's just lying silently under a blanket.
Oh, wow.
And Ohana, in his message, and this seems clearly coerced, we should say he's urging Israeli leaders to stop the war.
Right.
He also says that Babat is not doing well, physically and mentally suffering quite badly, according to Ohana.
That's incredibly difficult to hear. Have their identities been confirmed?
Yes, the Forum of Hostage Families, which represents many of these families, they've confirmed it's them.
Okay.
And the Babat family themselves, they put out a statement, understandably distressed, saying their loved ones desperately need help.
And I saw they were quite critical of the Israeli government.
Very critical, yeah, basically accusing decision makers of inaction, of not doing enough to bring them home.
So how has the Israeli government responded to the video itself?
They've labeled it psychological warfare. Sadistic propaganda, I think, was the term used.
Yeah.
Which, is surprising. It's a common assessment in these situations.
And online, social media reactions.
Pretty intense. Lots of people using words like unbearable, insoutenable in French, and calling the act of releasing it dehumanizing.
Yeah, I can see that. Is there any confirmation on when it was filmed? That's always a question with the...
That's the tricky part. AFP, the news agency, said they couldn't verify the date independently.
Right.
But Israeli media seems to be treating it as a recent proof of life, especially since both men have appeared in Hamas communications before.
Okay. So maybe we should take a step back just to set the scene again. October 7th, 2023.
Yeah, it's crucial context. The attack hit multiple places in southern Israel, but the Nova Festival, that was particularly brutal. So many civilians.
The numbers are just staggering. 1,218 people killed in total that day, mostly civilians.
And 251 people abducted, taken hostage.
Including specifically from Nova, how many was it?
It was 44 people taken from the festival itself.
And where do things stand with those hostages now?
Well, the latest difficult updates suggest that 17 of those 44 from Nova are still captive.
Okay.
And the Israeli military believes, or estimates, that 11 of those 17 are still alive.
Just devastating for those families. And overall, how many hostages are still believed to be held in Gaza?
The total number is 58. But the Israeli army has sadly declared 34 of those 58 deceased.
So many lives just shattered.
And it's also worth remembering, Hamas is still holding the remains of an Israeli soldier who was killed way back in 2014.
Right. And that attack, October 7th, it kicked off this current war.
Exactly. A war which, according to the health ministry in Gaza and the UN views these figures as reliable, has led to, an almost unbelievable number of deaths.
Yeah.
At least 52,810 people in Gaza.
Again, mostly civilians.
Predominantly, yes.
And this video release, it didn't happen in a vacuum, right? What else was going on around May 10th?
No, it didn't. On that same day, Palestinian civil defense reported an Israeli airstrike hitting a tent in Gaza City.
A tent?
Yeah, apparently killing 5 people. Reports said a couple and their 3 young children.
Oh, that's just horrible.
And that came just after another major incident, an Israeli airstrike on a UN RWA school in Jabalia.
UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Was it being used as a shelter?
It was. Packed with people sheltering. The strike killed 31 people, injured over 100 more.
Did Israel say why they targeted it?
Yes. The IDF stated they were targeting a Hamas command post operating from within the school compound.
Okay. This all just paints such a grim picture of the humanitarian situation.
It really does. We keep hearing warnings louder and louder from aid groups, from Palestinian officials about the crisis getting worse.
Famine risks?
Very real risks of famine, yeah. Largely due to the ongoing restrictions on aid getting into Gaza. It's dire.
So turning back to the video and its impact, How are people reacting inside Israel? You mentioned the family's criticism.
Well, it seems quite divided. On the same day the video came out Saturday, there were protests in Tel Aviv,
What were they demanding?
a ceasefire, and the immediate release of the hostages. They were very critical of Netanyahu's government and its handling of the situation.
So definite public pressure there.
Absolutely. And hearing directly from the Bobad family, their pain and anger, that carries a lot of weight, you
But
know.
the government's position hasn't shifted.
Not publicly, no. The stated position is still focused on the military operation. The goal, they say, is dismantling Hamas. Prioritizing ceasefire talks for hostages doesn't seem to be the main strategy right now.
Okay, so if Israel calls it psychological warfare, what's Hamas trying to achieve by releasing this now? What's the strategy, do you think?
Well, it's likely multi-pronged. First, it keeps the hostages, right in the global headlines. Constant pressure on the international community.
Makes sense.
Second, and maybe more critical for Hamas, is ramping up the pressure inside Israel. Showing the hostages, especially showing Bobat's condition, it's designed to fuel public anger and demands for a deal.
So trying to force the government's hand towards negotiation?
That seems like a key objective, yes. Pushing for a settlement, Israel has so far resisted. The timing could also be about influencing any current talks or calculations.
But we have to remember, as you said, the coercion aspect.
Absolutely. Arsen Ostrowski from the International Legal Forum highlighted this. You can't really take the messages at face value when someone is speaking under duress. That complicates everything.
How about the wider world? What's the international reaction been like?
We're seeing continued, maybe even stronger, calls for a ceasefire. Germany's foreign minister, Johann Wadeffel, called the situation in Gaza unbearable.
Strong words.
Yeah, he stressed the need for a deal to get hostages out and aid in. President Macron in France also pushing hard for a ceasefire.
Are there any actual diplomatic moves happening? Concrete proposals?
Well, Egypt reportedly floated an idea, a phased ceasefire where Hamas would release 5 hostages per week.
Has Israel responded to that?
No public response that we know of. So unclear where that stands. And just before this video, there was that peace conference in Jerusalem, May 9th.
Oh, right, with Ehud Olmert, the former Israeli PM?
And Nasser al-Kidwa, a Palestinian diplomat. They were talking about a 2-state solution, some kind of land swap, about 4.4%.
Still seems like a long shot politically, though.
Oh, absolutely. Huge political hurdles remain. But it shows people are still trying to find diplomatic paths, even now.
And I also read something about the U.S. changing how it plans to distribute aid in Gaza, excluding Israel.
Yeah, reports suggest the U.S. decided to manage its own direct aid distribution, not going through Israeli channels for that specific plan.
What does that signal, do you think?
It could definitely be read as growing U.S. frustration. Frustration with the delays and obstacles getting aid to Gazan civilians. A way to try and ensure it reaches people more directly, perhaps.
And throughout all this, the humanitarian crisis just grinds on. Those numbers, again, over 52,000 dead.
It's almost impossible to grasp the scale. Widespread displacement, infrastructure destroyed. Volker Turk, the UN human rights chief, used very stark language.
What did he say?
He described Israel's actions, the blockade, the airstrikes, as potentially amounting to collective punishment, which is, a very serious term under international law.
So wrapping this up, this video of Ahana and Boba, it's really thrown the hostage crisis back into the spotlight.
Sharply. And it highlights how interconnected it is with the just catastrophic situation for civilians in Gaza. You can't separate them.
And the reactions show deep divisions, don't they? Within Israel, internationally, different strategies from Hamas and the Israeli government.
Fundamentally different approaches, yeah.
Yeah.
With terrible consequences for hostages and for ordinary Gazans caught in the middle.
But there's still international pressure, diplomatic efforts trying to find a way through, despite how hard it looks.
They continue, yes, fueled by the urgency of the situation.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to consider is this. How does the release of videos like this, so raw and emotional, actually shape how we all understand this conflict?
And beyond public opinion, how might this kind of material, this psychological element, actually influence the incredibly tough choices that leaders on all sides are facing right now? What are the ethics around even watching and sharing it? Lots to think about.